So welcome everyone. It's 2 o'clock in Berlin. It's 3 o'clock in Lviv and Ukraine, I guess. So it's time to get started. It's a great pleasure to be here for the third day of the Ising Lectures and for this afternoon session where we have 2 exciting talks. And it's my great pleasure to present the first speaker, who will be Nir Gov from the Weizmann Institute in Israel. He will talk to us about new models of collective decision-making. And maybe very briefly, Nir Gov studied physics and did a PhD in physics at the Technical Institute in Israel, in Haifa, and works on various aspects of biophysics, ranging from what I would call classical biophysics, like behavioral membranes, to motility of cells or general motility, self-organized behavior of cellular systems, up to the topic that I assume he's going to talk about today, which is decision-making and decision-making more in behavior of animals, so macroscopic entities, and really taking the physics approach also to the understanding of these systems, which I'm at least very excited about, and I'm very happy that we have Nir here. And with this, welcome, and the stage is yours. We cannot hear you, unfortunately. You're muted.
Pavel, thank you very much for the nice introduction. There is a terrible echo. Okay, now it's gone, so it's okay. And Yuri for the invitation. And as I said to the people before the start, I am very much sorry not to be there in person. And I hope very much to visit Lviv and Ukraine in the near future. I was just saying that this is a strange time because we also had sirens, air raid sirens last night, and some explosions. But of course, I'm not comparing because the situation is different, and in some respect, we are the aggressor in our region than Ukraine is, of course, completely not the aggressor in the case against Russia. So that's just a small introduction. I will share screen to show the presentation. Okay, so can you see it? Yes. And I don't. So please, if there is any question, Pavel. I have a terrible echo. Is it okay now?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So I will tell you about the work that I presented very briefly in a small meeting that we had in a conference in Weizmann last week, and Pavel was also present. And the idea is to use the Ising model to go beyond the DRIFT-DIFFUSION model of decision-making. So I hope I will make a decent introduction into this field, but please stop me if something is not clear, and I will try to explain better. So how did I end up doing this work? You heard a little bit from Pavel that I am doing theoretical physics of all kinds of problems that come from biology. And for many years, I was working on cells and cell membranes, just like Pavel was saying. But then about 8 years ago, I came across a problem in the Weizmann Institute in the group of Ofer Feinerman, who is working on ants, although he sits in the physics department. And the problem is how ants carry together a piece of food that is much larger than one ant can move. So one ant cannot move this Cheerio that you see here. Do you see my cursor? Can I use my cursor?
Yes, it's
yes, the cursor is visible. Okay, so you see that the ants are much smaller than this Cheerio. This is the size of a Cheerio that you eat for breakfast sometimes. And by the way, they don't like this Cheerio, so you have to put a lot of meat food on it to make it tasty for them. And the same, of course, goes for these plastic discs. And he was studying this process, which I'm sure many of you were seeing on the way home from school as kids, and paying some attention to this. And it's a long question of how do they coordinate between themselves in order to move this object, because in order to move it, some of them have to be pullers and others have to be lifters. Like you see those in the back are slightly just lifting the object so it's not on the floor, but those that are in the front are actually doing the pulling, only those in the front. And the question is, how do they know what to do? So you could think that they interact by some chemical information, but in fact, we propose that they interact through the forces that they are feeling from the others, which are applying on the object. So each ant, in essence, becomes a binary object that can either be a puller or a lifter. It has more complicated dynamics because it can detach and attach. But if we forget about this attachment and detachment, when they are on the object, they can only switch between two possible roles. And that, of course, brings to mind, if you are a physicist, something which behaves like a spin. And indeed, we wrote down the equations for how they interact with each other by applying forces and feeling those forces, assuming that the object they're carrying is a perfectly rigid, elastic object that transmits the forces perfectly. There's no internal deformations, which of course is not the case if they are carrying an insect or something. And we came up with a set of equations which are identical to the good old Ising model, classical Ising model, of course. And the idea is that when they are in the same direction as the total force, as the total motion of the object, they try to align and apply the same force in the same direction. And when they feel a discord, when they feel that they are in the opposite direction from where the force is, they switch off and they don't apply a force, and instead they are just lifters. So this switching and interaction between them is ferromagnetic in the sense that they're always trying to align with the group. And that is a very efficient, simple rule that they can apply in order to coordinate their force applications and pull. Just to tell you that many ants cannot do that. Many ants can only grab an object and pull, and that's it, without any coordination. And then, of course, this object will not move anywhere, but this is an effective strategy if you're trying, for example, to passivate a foreign ant that invaded into the nest. So this was how I started thinking in terms of spin models for such systems. And as Pavel said, that brought me into the field of collective animal behavior, because here you have a group of ants which are behaving collectively. I just want to ask you to keep in mind this idea that a group of animals can behave as individual spins that are simply interacting with each other, because that's what we will use in the next project. So the next stage in the development of this project was to say, okay, now let's maybe generalize these spins, and instead of thinking of each of them as being along an object which is being carried along, like these circular plastic objects or Cheerios that we were giving the ants, let's just think of them as actually all being at the same point. So the spatial information, the spatial organization is completely lost. It's an all-to-all interacting spin system, so everybody feels everybody else. There's no meaning to any lattice or any spatial information. And we simply assume that we can use this model, or we try to use this model, to explain how groups of animals actually move through space. And we were motivated by a work that Ian Cousin from the Max Planck in Constance in Germany, and also a longtime collaborator of Pavel, was working on this question of how a group of animals which has two opposite ideas. So there is a group there's a subgroup in the big group which thinks that the correct target for the whole family of animals is to go up, and another subgroup that thinks that the best strategy is to go down. Maybe these ones think there is a good target in this direction, and these ones think that there is a good target, meaning food, for example, in this direction, but they cannot split. So if you don't allow them to split, how do they know where to go? And the model that we propose is simply to think of each of these entities as spins. They have ferromagnetic interactions within the same subgroup, but the interaction between the two subgroups depends on the angle between them. So if the angle is small, it is positive, it is ferromagnetic as well. But if it grows beyond a critical angle, which if it's a simple cosine, then it's just pi by 2, then it becomes negative and it becomes inhibitory or anti-ferromagnetic. So when one subgroup wants to be turned on, it tends to inhibit the other one. And then you can see that the angle at which the whole group will go, according to this model, simply behaves as expected. They keep the angle of the compromise, which is the angle which is exactly in between the two targets, until they reach a critical point where the interactions between them are inhibitory enough to allow for a phase transition where only one of them wins, either this one or this one. And this transition can be second order or first order, depending on the temperature. So what is the motivation? The motivation comes from experiments where, for example, Ian was tagging baboons in the savanna of Kenya, and he could actually track those animals and see that although they need to always be cohesive, they cannot split, but you see that momentarily there can be some indecision. Some group wanted to go right, another subgroup wanted to go up, and eventually the majority wins. In the case of the baboons, it's always the majority that wins. It's not dependent on the hierarchical ranking of the baboons in each subgroup. And he could actually show that these bifurcations fit very nicely a model which he proposed a long time ago, and that model is based on a simulation. So what's going on in this model? This is a very complicated model. It's not a spin model. In this model, you really have self-propelled particles that are really moving in real space. Each one of them, you have 20 such particles, each moving independently of the other, but they interact with each other. So they interact by trying to align themselves as much as possible to all their neighbors. They sort of know where all their neighbors are heading, and they try to fit themselves with those neighbors. And in addition, if they also have some pre-position to go towards one target rather than the other, and here you have the white animals, they prefer this target, the white target, and the red prefer the red target, they also have a tendency to point in the direction in which they want to go. So they are trying to influence the others simply by trying to go in that direction, but there are strong enough spring forces or effective Leonard-Jones interactions between them that keeps it from splitting. Now, when you run these simulations, you get very nicely the same kind of bifurcations that we also extract using this simple spin model. The big advantage of this spin model over these simulations is that, first of all, you can actually understand something very fundamental about the nature of this transition. And second of all, when you are increasing the number of these entities in the simulations, they often break up, and you have to run the simulation again and again. It's very costly. What you see in the simulation, which of course you don't get in the spin model, is that you get here the spatial information. And you see that as long as there is the compromise direction, which is the middle, both subgroups are in the front. But once a decision is being made, for example, to go in the direction of the red group, of the red target, sorry, you can clearly see that the red subgroup is leading and the white is trailing. And this spatial separation plays, we think, a key role in this decision-making process in this full flock model, which is not identical, but we think has the same type of bifurcation as the spin model. Okay, so this was all to do with spatial motion. We started with the spatial motion of the in real space of the ants, and now the animal groups. So can we now go beyond moving in real space to making abstract decisions? And Olga, who is now a PhD student of mine, but started off as a master's student, was thinking about how can we take this spin model and use it for an abstract decision making. So we're not moving now through space. We don't have to make decisions about where to go in space, although the hamburger place is not the same place as the pizza place. But first you have to make a decision which is in abstract space. What do you want to eat, for example? Or in many such tests which are run on monkeys and also on humans, you have to give a yes-no decision or choose between usually just binary decisions. And the most successful model for explaining how you and me and most people make decisions is the DRIFT-DIFFUSION model. And the DRIFT-DIFFUSIon model is very simple and very successful, but I hope to convince you by the end of this talk that it also has limitations, which we can go beyond these limitations by allowing by using this Ising spin model. So the basic idea of the DRIFT-DIFFUSIon model is that there is some abstract coordinate in your brain, which means that there is some integrator, and this integrator is integrating the firing of neurons that are firing to tell you to choose option A, which is here above, or some other group of neurons which are firing in order to make you go into the other options, which is minus. So there is some group of neurons which are integrating the firing of both of them, taking the difference if you want, and therefore by both groups firing, some firing to go to the top option and some firing to go to the bottom option, the integrator is essentially making a random motion in this activation space or integrated activation space, because you're integrating the firing over time. Time is the x-axis. And when the integrated activation reached some threshold, a decision has been made. For example, this trajectory reached here, this threshold, which is shown by the horizontal line, then a decision has been made to choose option A, and if you reach here, it's option B. So this is, and the firing is described by a diffusion coefficient, noise or the firing. Now, there is a drift, which is called also a bias, and that means that you have some preposition to prefer one option over the other. Now, you can have this preposition because you learned already from past experience that this option is better, it gives you better reward, or simply as time goes by, you are using your senses, for example, you see, you smell, and you are gaining more and more information, which is building up a bias in your brain to prefer one option over the other. Now, this is very successful model, although it's very, very simple. It gives the correct distributions of the reaction time. You see that the reaction time, or the time it took you to make a decision, has some long tail distribution, and this fits nicely with the experimental data. So if the drift is to the top, you see that you reach the top much more often than you reach the bottom. So you make not so many errors. If there is a bias, you can say that taking the choice against the bias is the wrong choice, is an error. So you can now relate the probability of making a mistake to the reaction times, and you can actually compare to the model, to the experimental data. Okay, so this is the nice properties of the DRIFT-DIFFUSIon model. We wanted to go beyond that because it is so simple that there's not much you can do with it in order to make it more realistic. For example, there is the issue of inhibition. In the brain, there are excitatory neurons which are firing to excite other neurons, and therefore they're called excitatory neurons, and there are neurons that are inhibiting the firing of other neurons. How do you put in this model the role of inhibition? So you can put it in by saying that the diffusion is just very small because all the firing is just inhibited, so all this random motion is greatly diminished. So this is one way to do it, but it's not an independent parameter from the other parameters. You simply lump everything on top of this diffusion, which is a one parameter model. So it is very limited. We did find some previous work, you see, from about 10 years ago, which did look at using an Ising model for making decisions. It's called the Ising decision maker. It's not integrative in the sense that you always start from the zero activity in both groups of neurons, in both groups of spins that are encoding for either choice A or choice B. And you simply make a trajectory within this activity space or spin space, and the group that grows the largest while the other one is small, or vice versa, that the first one that reaches these green boxes is a decision. So the problem with this model is that it's not easy to extend it in some limit to the drift diffusion model, but essentially it has the same equations as what I will show you, although they didn't also explore the role of global inhibition. But you see that there is an internal excitation, which is like the ferromagnetic interaction, and there is inhibition between the subgroups, which is like the antiferromagnetic interaction that we also have. So let's go to the model that we used, and it's very simple. It's based on the usual Hamiltonian that you all know from the Ising system. We have two subgroups of spins. One is encoding for moving up. The other one is encoding for moving down, moving along this integrated coordinate, which is this integrator in the brain, which integrates the firing of the two opposing groups of neurons. And the decision will be when this position along this coordinate reaches some threshold. So the basic framework is exactly like the diffusion, but the motion will not be a simple diffusion. It will be given by a velocity, which is simply the difference between those that are firing or spin up, which are in the group going up, and the number of spins which are up, which are turned on in the group, which is decoding the motion down. The difference between them is the speed, and the position is just the integration of this speed over time. And we can also add an external field, and this external field is eta, and it acts on both subgroups, so on all the spins in the system, and it's simply an inhibition. And in the brain, maybe you've heard about these neurotransmitters. So there's GABA, which is a neurotransmitter, which is indeed acting to inhibit the excitation, to turn off the firing, which in our case turns these spins from 1 to 0. So each spin has either of two values, 0 and 1, just like in the case of the ants and the group of animals. And 0 means that basically it's quiet, it's off, and 1 means in the language of the neurons that it is firing. Now, the spin flick dynamics, we used Glauber rates, which of course maintain the detailed balance in the system. And of course, these are the individual rates for flipping a spin from one group or the other, or from one group or the other, with the addition of the inhibition. So this is the model. We still don't introduce here any bias. So this is the model without any bias. Both sides, both options are equally likely, equally attractive. If you solve the mean field solution, you can write down this functional for V, which is like the order parameter in the system, right? Because V is the difference between spin up in one group and spin down in the other group. And you can actually solve this mean field equation. So the second order transition is when you get that this functional or this V disappears, and that's the blue line. So everything above it is in the disordered phase, and everything below it is in the ordered phase, where V is non-zero, the mean field velocity. And you can also find a first order transition, which is this red line, by looking at when this functional is 0, but also its differential is 0, its gradient is 0. And by finding these points, you can actually find this second phase transition, which divides the disordered phase from another kind of phase, which is an intermittent phase. So that may be a little bit strange to you, because it's not maybe, but it's actually very similar to spin models that were proposed long time ago to explain superfluid mixtures of helium-3 and helium-4 and those kind of models. So we have a tricritical point, which we can find, of course. And now let's look a little bit about the properties of the motion in each of these regimes. By the way, please stop, Pavel or somebody, if you get some question from the crowd and something is not clear. Can I continue?
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I have just a small question.
Yeah.
Just if you make the pause, you talk about the initial condition. You have just half of spins up, half of spins down. But have you considered the cases when you have the different initial conditions? Does it affect
wait. Did I say
or
something?
Maybe I skip the yes.
Is it here?
Yes. If you took the different group sizes on the
Here,
initial
this is the velocity, yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, so the initial condition, I didn't actually say anything about it. You can start off with the initial conditions. Well, so far we didn't talk about any time dependence, right? So we didn't talk about any simulations. But if you run simulations, we'll get to that. You can start with the initial conditions where all the spins are turned off, and then they begin to turn on using these dynamics, these stochastic dynamics. Or you can start with all of them, just like you said, half by chance, half on, half off. And then again, they will re-equilibrate according to the dynamics by these rates. But this phase diagram is not dependent on any initial conditions. This is just the mean field phase diagram, right? It's not, there's no time dependence here.
Okay. Thank you.
So let's look now, but how does the dynamic look? So the dynamic look like you expect. So in the disordered phase, what do you see? There is no global organization in the sense that the groups that are pointing up and those that are pointing down are equally flipping on and off. And you see that the velocity of the object, which is, to remind you, the difference between those spins up and those spins down, which are turned on in both groups. And you see that it's a simple Gaussian around 0. And indeed, if you look at the trajectory, it looks exactly like a drift diffusion model. So you recaptured the drift diffusion model above the critical temperature of this system. Okay, now what happens in the ordered phase? In the ordered phase, just like you expect in a ferromagnet, your velocity, which is the order parameter, is not peaked at 0, but it's peaked at two values which are non-zero, either going up or going down, equally likely. And you see that the trajectories are very ballistic if you're at very low temperature, but they can be more run and tumble as you come close to the transition. I'll show you that in a second. In the intermittent phase, what do you find? You find that your order parameter has three stable solutions. It has the ferromagnetic solutions of pointing up or pointing down, but it can still be also stuck in this solution of not going anywhere. And in the trajectories, you see that there are many pauses in the motion. So you can move ballistically, but then you pause for some time, and then you move ballistically again. As you come close to the tricritical point, or in fact to any point which is close to the transition but below the transition, you see that you make run and tumble motion. So you see that you move ballistically for some time, and then you switch your direction of motion. You move ballistically, and then you switch your direction of motion. This is not a pure diffusion, but of course on large scales, it looks like diffusion, but that's the whole point. We are not interested here on infinite scales, because the thresholds are at some finite distance and they control the error and the reaction time. And therefore, it makes a very crucial difference that we switch from a pure diffusion to run and tumble below the transition. So there's no bias. You don't know where you're going. It's equally likely if you choose this option or this option, but you're making a motion which is run and tumble, and that's already different from the pure diffusion, as I will hopefully convince you. So this is the kind of dynamics that this gives you. And already, by the way, this is very different from the usual drift diffusion. In what sense? For example, noise in the drift diffusion is equal to the diffusion coefficient. So larger noise equal larger diffusion coefficient. Here, if you think of the temperature as the noise, because the temperature is trying to make all these neurons fire on and off completely randomly and not interact with with each other very strongly. If you increase the temperature, you're actually decreasing the diffusion coefficient, and you can understand why. Because the diffusion, which is the motion along this integrated abstract axis, the motion is given by the velocity, which is the difference between how many are pointing up versus how many are pointing down. But if they are both now at high temperature, flipping up and down, on and off, completely randomly, the number is actually perfectly canceling each other, and you're almost not moving. So in this system, actually increasing the noise decreases your diffusion coefficient. You can increase the diffusion coefficient by decreasing the noise going down in temperature, but then at some point you reach a critical temperature and the whole behavior becomes different because you cross into the run and tumble behavior, and even further you go into this ballistic behavior. So yes, you are like the drift diffusion in this regime, but the relation between noise and diffusion is very different in this model. Okay, now what happens if we add bias? If you learned that one option is better than the other, so we add to this Hamiltonian what you expect. We add some extra field, which acts, in this case, we chose to make it act only on one subgroup. So only one subgroup, the subgroup that is learned something, the subgroup that got a reward for going in this direction, has a slightly lower energy by an amount epsilon 1. You can do it in other ways. You can do it that one has a low energy and the other one has a penalty of energy, so the field acts immediately on both of them. It doesn't matter. So qualitatively, everything stays the same. So now you can say that there is a correct option and a wrong option, and this is, of course, how it looks. The mean field equation is now slightly different because of this epsilon, and you can see that the mean field solutions are also shifted, and you can compare a simulation to this mean field prediction of where is the velocity. And now you can see that the speed in the direction of the correct option is faster than the speed going in the direction of the wrong option, which makes sense because there is an extra field which points in this direction. So there is now an asymmetry. Now we can ask the question, how can we relate the reaction time to the error rate? So what we do in the simulation is that we map in this field of inhibition and temperature for a given fixed bias, very small, because of course if the bias is very large, there is almost no error. But even in this small bias, you can see that the error is almost zero or very, very small in the drift diffusion regime, in the disordered regime. So you may say, aha, I don't want to make lots of mistakes. I want to make very few mistakes in my brain. So I should have the brain always in this regime, but you pay a cost. And the cost is the reaction time. And this is the log of the reaction time. So the reaction time really grows exponentially as you are in this drift diffusion, because you're, as we said, you're almost not moving. So it takes you infinite time to reach the threshold. You reach the correct threshold with very, very high probability, but it takes you almost forever. If you're very far from the transition, here in the very ordered regime, you have lots of mistakes, almost 50-50, which means it's almost like throwing the coin, but you're very fast. So it's clear that there is a speed accuracy trade-off in this system, so that if you make fast decisions, you have to pay with accuracy. And you know from your own life that if I give you a question in an exam and I'm giving you only 10 seconds to give you the right answer, or I give you 1 minute, then you get better results if I give you longer time. So there is a speed accuracy trade-off, which you're all probably aware of that. What happens now if we actually make some comparison to an experiment? So the experiment that we were motivated by is an experiment that came out a few years ago from a group in Weizmann, where they actually had a very intriguing observation that they could measure for the first time that this neurotransmitter GABA, which is introducing inhibition in the brain, actually increases slightly in the brains of people when they're under greater uncertainty. So we asked those researchers, and they couldn't give us a good explanation from the available theory that they were at least aware of, okay? Because there's many theory of neuroscience, maybe they were not also aware of all the possible models, but they didn't give us a nice explanation. So we were asking ourselves if our model can actually give an intuitive explanation for that. And for this, you can do the following game. You can say, okay, let's say I have some fixed error of 37%. So it's not 50%. I'm not making so many mistakes, but I'm making a lot of mistakes. It's a very difficult problem. And I'm making lots of mistakes. So if I look at the line or the contour of equal error for this fixed bias, then I see that it is along these blue points. And then we ask the question, if we increase slightly the inhibition along all of these points, so we now shift from the blue points to the orange points, how much do we gain in accuracy, and how much do we lose in reaction time? So you can see that there is a region here which is actually near the tricritical transition, where the gain in error is maximal. So the reduction of the error from about 37% is is greatest here. But of course, there is all the time a huge pay in reaction time. So you have a significant decrease in error, but you are paying in the reaction time. So at least we could suggest that maybe what people are doing in the brain automatically when they are facing a greater uncertainty is that they're trying to figure out what to do in the face of this uncertainty. And in order to make slightly better choices, they slightly increase this inhibition, but of course they pay by taking longer to make a decision. And the idea was that actually being close to this tricritical point could actually be an interesting or useful place for the brain to be, because that's the place where, in the direction of increasing inhibition, you get the sharpest contours of the accuracy, as I remind you here. So if I move up, I'm almost going along the contour here, but I'm almost cutting across the contour here. So being in this region, I can gain the most advantage of increasing my accuracy per a tiny increase in inhibition. Now, we also looked at some experimental data where they were running new data, which was not published at the time. And here, the volunteers were asked to play a very simple game. You have to choose between two shapes, but the shapes come in two pairs. One pair is a loss-loss pair, and the other one is a gain-gain pair. What does it mean? Here, for example, this shape gives you 70% of the times that you press on it an increase in your score. And this shape gives you only an increase in your score for 30% of the time. So between the two of them, you always have to choose the circle in order to maximize your score. In the loss, it's the opposite. This one gives you, this hexagon gives you for 70% of the times a decrease in your score, and this gives you only a 30% decrease of the times decrease in your score. So here, the better choice is the square. And surprisingly, what was found is that because when these two games are played separately, people very quickly understand here that they have to follow the circle, and here that they have to follow the square. But when you play this game, when the two of these pairs of shapes are shown to you randomly, so you're not only shown the gain shapes, but only switched between places. So sometimes the circle is on the right, sometimes it's on the left, but you're also switching between these pairs randomly. You don't know which pair you will see in the next trial. Then surprisingly, people are able to learn very well which shape is the correct shape for the gain, but they don't learn very well which shape is the shape for the loss. And that gave us an interesting example where we can say that the brain is under the same conditions, because we don't think the brain can actually change between every few seconds its position in this phase space. But there is a very big difference in the arrow, and there is also a big difference in the reaction time. Okay, so what we then compare this to the model, and what we found that the place in the model where we can fit both these two differences in arrows and these two differences exactly in this ratio of reaction times is in fact all the places which are given by these green dots. Yes, there's a bit of a scatter because of the arrows, but I think you can convince yourself that there is a strong locus of these points which is around the tri-critical point. So we think that maybe this data supports our idea that indeed this model suggests that this region is beneficial. Due to the lack of time, I will just jump quickly over this newer set of data because there is no time. So I will give you the conclusion. So the conclusion is that we propose that this Ising integrative model, so it's an Ising model, but the Ising model is used not instantaneously to say which group is firing more, but it's actually used in the same sense as the DRIFT-DIFFUSION. It's used as a mover of this integrated coordinate, and that gives it a very special properties that the motion of this abstract point along this integrated coordinate is now moving very differently from the DRIFT-DIFFUSION. It's moving more like the run and tumble if you're in the ordered phase, and that gives you some unique properties. So as I said, this is the main difference in terms of the dynamics. We think that this model suggests that there is a region there is a region around this tri-critical point where the brain can actually play very little with the inhibition. You don't want to have a lot of inhibition too much because then you'll become depressed, or too little and then you'll become epileptic. So there's actually not much big changes that you want to do, but in order to improve your accuracy, of course, you have to pay something as far as reaction time goes. So yeah, that's the experimental data that we think suggests that indeed the brain is situated somewhere in this region. I'll also say that it's actually interesting that people believe that in the brain there is an excitation inhibition balance. So the overall effect of inhibition is roughly balancing the overall firing or excitation in the brain, and why there is this very close balance between excitation and inhibition is not known. But in our model, if you look at the difference between the total excitation and the global inhibition, you see that it's exactly zero in this black band, which is at the tri-critical point. Not surprisingly, that's when the inhibition begins to dominate over the interactions and you get a phase transition. But that also means that there is maybe another explanation for why you want to maintain this balance in order to be in this beneficial region of this parameter space. The big challenge for us now is to try to extend this to 3 or more abstract options. Just to tell you that the DRIFT-DIFFUSION model, for example, has not been successfully, or at least there's no consensus on how to extend it to decisions of more than binary. And we are motivated by the work that I showed you in the beginning about navigation, where it was actually super easy for us to think in terms of many targets, because each target is just a vector in space. And in real space, there's no abstract space there. And we got very interesting hierarchy of bifurcations. So we are interested to see if we can actually do something also in abstract space to answer this question of 3 or more options. And maybe also when you are presented 3 or more abstract options, you actually work like in real space, where you make it's a series of binary decisions, meaning that if I give you the option of sushi, pizza, or hamburger, maybe you don't think immediately of all 3 of them, but you first eliminate one and then remain with the other 2, and then between the other 2 you make a decision. So you break it down into a series of binary decisions. We want maybe to combine this abstract decision making again back into the animal motion. So think about the baboons. They are both walking with the others, but they also have to make individual decisions. So it's both abstract space and real space. And to add the process of learning, which we have just started now, and think also about the criticality issue. You may have maybe learned that there's many works that say that the brain network is critical, but they are thinking more about spatial criticality, in the sense that there is like avalanches of activity exactly poised at the position between non-percolation, so that they die out, and percolation, that they cause a global reaction. But of course, again, there people think about the problem of epilepsy, where they are over connected. So I don't know if this is really so closely related to this issue of criticality that we are proposing here. So I'm thanking all the people that I may have mentioned along the way, although the work was for Olga. And I just show you this nice movie, because in the beginning I just talked about ants, but I didn't show you any movie. So now you can believe me that they really know how to carry something together. And thank you very much.
So thanks a lot, Nir, for this fascinating talk. Maybe one note is that actually we don't have a lack of time, because you would in principle have even half an hour extra now.
Wow.
Including discussions, as I understand. But I guess that makes it the better for us, because there will be more opportunity for questions and discussions.
Okay.
Maybe also in a broader sense of this overall direction, because I think it's super exciting. But maybe if you're fine with this, we would start with just questions regarding the talk.
Okay, so shall I leave the share screen, or shall I change back so I can see the person asking me the question?
I guess it's a little bit what you prefer, because I think sometimes it would be good for people to refer to certain slides. So
okay.
Maybe.
So let's start with the slides still there. I'm sure you can see them now. And if I see that it's better the other way, I'll just stop sharing. Okay.
Okay, great. So what are the questions? Are there any questions? Yeah, so I see at least one question now, so please go ahead.
You mentioned learning or relation to learning in the end.
Sorry, you're muted.
Oh,
No, I can hear the question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I wonder how you imagine to incorporate this. Is this like, should I think of some physics of machine learning, Weizmann, Hopfield type stuff there, or is this a completely different direction?
So yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we thought about, because up to now all we did is, as I described to you, we just put in this bias, which is like the learning. Let's say you have a bias towards one option versus the other, which means that you have learned that this option is better by this amount. So we always put it in by hand. But then actually we recently realized that we can actually describe learning, because we can start off with actually playing the same game that the human subject is playing. And whenever you reach one target, then the same game that I showed you before, 70% of the time, let's say it's the game shapes, 70% of the time one shape gives you a reward and the other one only 30% of the time. So whenever you get a reward, this option, this group of spins, which was encoding for this option, gets an extra little delta epsilon of bias in its direction. And then you repeat and you repeat. But now you have to give several constraints. First of all, when you do learning, you have to give a constraint on the time, because the time that you are given to make a decision in all of these games is finite. I mean, we don't wait for 1 hour, right? So you're given a choice of these two shapes. Where's the game? Let me show you. Yeah, you're given an option of these two shapes. And let's say you're told in advance that after, I don't know, 2 seconds, if you don't make a decision, then you miss this trial. You didn't gain anything, you didn't lose anything, but you missed the opportunity to gain more score, and then you get a new trial. So we have to choose this constraint. And then what I think we will find, but we're actually doing it these days, is that what I think we will find is that actually this learning process will be most efficient not here, where you are very, very slow, so much so that many trials you don't reach a decision and you're just missing them. And also not here, where your trajectories are so ballistic that you are not responding to the small bias that you are beginning to build in the direction of the correct option, because just you're ignoring it, so you're just throwing the dice. So I'm sure what we will get is that the best learning is actually again in this region, also in this region. But if you think of some finite noise and only playing around with the inhibition in the brain, then I think we'll get again that the best learning is here. So this is not really learning in the sense of machine learning like you asked, but it's more learning at the level of a very, very basic architecture, which is a decision-making architecture, and you are trying to build a bias within this small decision-making architecture. Maybe you can even think about it, now that I think about it, that I don't know enough about it, maybe you can even think about these two groups of spins, yes, those encoding this option and those encoding this option, in some sense as maybe some small structure within these huge networks of the AI. But I don't know enough about how the AI networks are working to tell you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know whether it's only me, because I had to switch to my phone for connection issues. So I didn't see your slides if you are sharing them right now.
I am sharing them now, yeah. Shall I stop and share again?
I don't know. Did anyone else see the slides?
Sorry. I'm out of the sharing. Sorry. I somehow it switched out. I don't know why. Okay.
Yeah, maybe just as a comment. So I think we understood the reply, but it was you were clearly referring to something on the slide which we didn't see.
So again, I'm not sharing screen now.
You're not sharing now, no.
Not sharing now, and I hope I am. No.
Now you're sharing.
You made a good job in explaining it, so I think I got the message, even though I didn't see the slides.
Sorry. So this is the slides I was talking about. Sorry.
Sorry, but now we see the browser window, the Jitsi, not the slides.
Okay, one second. I'll go. Why doesn't it work again like it worked so nicely before?
So the point is that there is a time lag. You know, when you do some option, it comes to be active in some 10 seconds.
Is it now? Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the small bias I was talking about in the answer. And this is the bias that at the moment we put in by hand. And this is the small bias that I was thinking of now implementing as something that we actually run many such trials, just like the person. And slowly each time you make such a trial, you gain some reward by choosing one shape versus the other one. And anytime you get a reward, you build a small bias, and so on and so forth. And you say, let's say after 50 trials, how strong is the bias? Meaning, how strongly did I learn that this option is better than the other one? Okay, and then the idea is that to do that at different points as function of temperature and inhibition. And I'm quite sure that when we are deep in the inhibition regime, which is the diffusion regime, the reaction time is so huge that in fact many trials will go to waste, because we will not reach a decision by the time the finite time of the trial ended. While here again we are not very efficient at learning, because we are basically just throwing the coin, because the ballistic motion is so strong that the small bias that you are building by getting a reward each time is almost insignificant compared to the strong interaction between the spins. So I think only in this regime, again, just like susceptibility of a thermodynamic system, you get it at its maximal at the transition. That's the region where it's most responsive to a small external field. And if you think about it, this bias, which stands for learning, is like a small external field. So I think we will get that learning is strongest in this regime, and actually is weak when you are not enough inhibition, which means that you're too excited or that you are too inhibited. So you can actually think about it that maybe if you come to the lecture too relaxed because you had, I don't know, a smoke of something, yes, or too much beer, then you're not learning very well. If you're coming to the classroom too excited and too hyper excited, maybe you also don't learn very well. You have to be in some calm regime, which is of course not sleepy, and then you learn the best. So maybe that's the take-home message.
Thanks a lot. We have some more questions, and I think Uwe Teuber was first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Nir. Really beautiful talk, and I'm always envious about the fantastic data you can play with. On this issue of trying to tune these complex systems like the brain to a critical point to optimize them, yes, of course, you have maximum sustainability and you have really nice correlated responses, but they also take forever, right? At the critical point, any of them that is close to a continuous phase transition, you're suffering critical slowing down, and it's very hard to actually control the system. So there needs to be some really cute fine-tuning. You're really not right at the critical points. You're sufficiently close to it to get nice cooperative behavior, but you need to be sufficiently far away from it so you're not plagued by critical slowing down. And you might have partially addressed that before, but I'm curious how you...
So I think what you're saying is correct and interesting, of course. It's interesting to think how it is related here. But if you think about what's going on here, is that we don't actually have this slowing down, in the sense that the critical slowing down is true for a system which has spatial dimensions. And then you have larger and larger domain, but the domains are large in space. And then it takes much longer time for these big flips of these huge domains which are percolating the system. But here, there's no spatial information at all, because all the spins are actually located on a point, if you want. So the flipping is not in that sense slowing down. And in fact, if you look at the reaction time, which is the time it takes for the system to reach a decision, which is the time it takes the system to reach one of these thresholds, right? So you start always in the middle and you begin to make this random walk. And because of the small bias, you reach more often, let's say, the correct option. And you just look at the distribution of these reaction times, the distribution of times, like the first passage times from 0 to this threshold. And you can see that, in fact, you have these times that are huge in the diffusion regime, because your diffusion coefficient is decaying and decaying the more you're going into the disordered regime. And as you're coming close to the transition, you're in fact picking up speed, because the speed is the spins here. So it's a strange system where the spins themselves, yes, you're right, they have this critical transition and susceptibility, but that's just for them, their own flippings. But the decision of the whole system is not done immediately by actually looking at how they are flipping or not flipping. It's only indirectly by that, because they're flipping this way or that way, gives you the speed, and that speed is giving you and that speed is integrated over time to give you the position, and only that position, if it reaches a threshold, that gives you a decision. So it's a little bit indirect. It's a little bit of a non-intuitive spin system, because we are really used to thinking of spins as situated on a stationary place, either on a stationary place as a point or in the stationary lattice. And then the other parameter, which here is the velocity, is simply the magnetization. And when that is giving us some direction of magnetization, that's it. But here it's only the beginning, because when you have a direction of magnetization, you begin to move, and this movement over time gives you a trajectory, and that trajectory, where it ends, gives you a decision. So it is a little bit, and that decision time is what we're interested in and plotting here. And you see that doesn't actually have any divergence at the transition. So it's a little bit strange and different from the usual spatial Ising systems where indeed you have critical slowing down for this dynamics of the magnetization, or the dynamics of the speed. But here it's a little bit different. So error is not where if the instantaneous velocity is in the right direction or not, but if it was in the right direction for long enough time to get you to this threshold, which is the correct threshold. So it's a little bit different, I think, but it's a very interesting point.
But this might have been how nature has solved this problem, right? So really to overcome this critical slowing down and optimize that process.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it's exactly the answer. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
We have another question by Rehovot.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, I had 2 questions, but after you answer, I had even 3 questions. So I start from the.
Pavel said we have time, so it's okay.
I start from the most recent. When you told that you don't have spatial dimension in your model, could I think about this ij you have here in the Hamiltonian? Could I think that it is kind of Katz-like model, that all of them are on the complete graph?
Yes, I mean, yes, it's all to all. All the spins are interacting with all the spins. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then on the complete, that's not to continue discussion, but somehow on the complete graph still I have critical slowing down with mean field exponents.
For the spins flips.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't care so much about the spin flips here.
Yeah, you are speaking about velocities, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's also true that we are working here with a finite size system, and also in order to not make the energy diverge, we use the usual Katz convention that we divide by the total number of spins, so that of course the interaction doesn't diverge in the thermodynamic limit. But no, we didn't observe any change in the dynamics as far as the mean first passage time, which is given by this reaction time. So what we call reaction time is actually the passage time of this object, which is the integral over this velocity over time. And the velocity, just like we said, is in fact the order parameter. You can think of that as just the total magnetization.
Yeah, thank you. Then another question, again, looking on this Hamiltonian. You told us that this E1, small bias, small external field, and I have small bias, and then all the story goes on unfolding. But imagine, for example, I could imagine a situation where doesn't exist the ground truth. So I cannot say that up is better or down is better. Sometimes in my experience of the cognition of the brain activity, sometimes up was better, sometimes down was better, and then the story unfolds in this direction. Then, in my understanding, this would mean that this epsilon1 is random variable. Why are you thinking about introducing here random bias and looking? Because I think then the phase diagram might be very unexpected.
Well, first of all, when you put in the small bias, then the transitions are actually now smoothed out, right? There's no real transition anymore, because you never switch from V equals 0 to V non-zero, because it's like an external field that already kills the transition.
Random field, random field, that's more subtle. That's not
Yeah.
necessarily. Random field, it will depend on the distribution of your random variables.
But
that's why I say...
But you're talking about a random field in time. So, because the random field here is that you say that each time I make a trial, I make a trial, right? I make one go and I reach a decision, and you say that I get a reward or I don't get a reward, let's say 50-50 times. So this
No. I say that epsilon1 has index epsilon I, and it is on the summation sign.
Yes, you can do something like that. We haven't tried it. We haven't tried something like that. So to run a random reward, a random bias that builds at each time. No, but this summation here is over all the spins. So each spin has, all the spins feel the same bias. They cannot feel different biases.
Yes, it was my question. They cannot feel different bias.
No, because they're all in the same place. They're all in the same place. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question: when you were showing us an outcome and telling that it seems that the brain operates in the vicinity of tricritical point.
Yes.
When I was looking on this diagram, I also thought it might well be that the system is operating in the vicinity of the line of critical points, because your green dots.
Yes.
Okay, they are near tricritical, but also they are more near the blue line on the right from the tricritical point.
So I agree with you, and this data is very poor in the sense of its statistics. It's, I would say, only suggestive and not more. If you look at the contours that are drawn here, you're not surprised that indeed it traces some region here, because you see that the contours of this ratio of the reaction times of the gain and the loss, which from the experiments is about 0.61, you see that it's roughly this color, and you see that it goes along these contours that are here. So I think it might very well be that the brain is somehow along an arc, which is at some distance below this line. I can show more recent data where they also looked at this GABA amount of GABA, which is this inhibitor, and there what we did is that we took out of this group of people which were playing the game only the group of people which actually we could say that learned something, because there were those that made so much errors that we said that they are essentially not learned very well. And in this group of people that learned something, so all errors below 20%, we said, okay, they learned something. And only in this group, what we found was actually interesting, because we saw that there is a subgroup of people, each dot is another person, where under the case of playing the game, so learning something, as opposed to having nothing to learn, which is the 50-50 case, which we always give, they give it as a control because there's nothing to learn. No shape is better than the other. So it's supposed to be the zero bias behavior. Although the person doesn't know it and is trying to learn something, but there's nothing to learn. So you see that in all of this group of people in the green, they make very few mistakes, and they are making a decision faster when there is the game versus no game. So the reaction time is below 1, the ratio. And that is the typical expected behavior in the drift diffusion model, and also in our model. So in our model, if you have a learning, you have a bias, and because of the bias, you make faster and accurate decisions. And these are the green points. And we can fit the data from the experiments on this subject, on all these green points, along these green points here. So it's here, in the bottom panel, the green points are not standing for the individuals like here. We took all this green group, we averaged them, and all the green points here in the model can sort of fit the average of this green group of people over here. But what is interesting is that there was at the same experiment another group of people, the blue people, which are also making very few mistakes, less than 20%, but they take longer time to make a decision under the game when there is something to learn, as compared to the game when there is nothing to learn. So they learn something, they form the bias, but they make slower decisions, but still accurate. So what's going on with these people? So what apparently is happening with these people is that they have a higher ratio of the inhibition, and they actually measured it to be higher by about 10% compared to the other group, to the green group. So what we decided to try to do is the following game, if you want. We took all these green points, which we fitted very well to these green people, which behave as everybody expects. You learn, you make a bias, you make faster decisions, and they're also accurate. And we simply shifted them up by 10%, okay? And now we took these blue points and we said, okay, they are another group of people, and can we show that this blue group here fits this blue group here? And what we found is that, first of all, yes, they have a higher GABA. That was the whole point. And we can actually now show that this group of people, they can have exactly the ratio of the reaction time compared to the green ones, which is about 30% higher in this regime of temperatures. So only in this regime of temperatures, they actually fit very well all the data. So you can take the green group and you can say that the people with the blue group, they have another strategy for making a decision under conditions where it's difficult. So the green group, what they do between learning nothing and learning the game, when they learn the game, they make a strong bias and they make fast decisions and accurate. The blue group is somehow not able to make the same large bias. They are not learning as well, so they compensate by increasing their inhibition, and indeed their GABA level is distinctly larger than the other group, so they are more inhibiting the activity in the brain. But by inhibiting the activity in the brain, they can actually reach the same level of low errors, so same high level of accuracy, but the price that they are 30% slower in reaction time compared to the green group. So they are slow thinkers, but they are compensating for not learning as strongly by increasing their inhibition, taking longer to reach a decision, but still having a very accurate level of making decisions. And the rest of the group simply didn't learn very well, so they don't form any bias to speak of, and they just didn't get it. And this is a very difficult game because between the two shapes, you have only 65% versus 35%. So if you choose the correct shape, 65% of the time you get score, and the wrong shape you still get a score 35% of the time. So it's a very tricky game to learn. So many people just don't get it, that there is a significant difference and that they should always chase the correct shape, the shape that gives them a higher probability of getting the score. There is a group of people that did learn it, those that learn it with a strong bias, and then they are along these points in our model, and another group which we can explain as the other group only shifted up in inhibition, and that can explain also the behavior of this group. So we think that it gives us more flexibility to explain these experimental data which relate these days inhibition to decision making. But to your question about where is our brain, as you see, it's exactly like you said, it's not only near the tricritical point, but it's along some arc. And in general, these arcs are sort of parallel to this transition line. So to tell you if it's here or if it's here, I don't know exactly, but it's somewhere following this region. And probably there is a variability among all of us, right?
Thank you. Thank you for the answer, and thank you very much for your talk.
All right, thanks a lot. I think there are no remaining questions, but it's also 3:15, which was the scheduled time for the end of this first part.
Can I just see the faces of the people that talk to me, because I was only
Sure.
looking at my slides and resisting not to see somebody in the face. If you can, how can I see everybody if I?
So there should be like a 4-tile symbol where you can click
Yes.
and change the
Yes.
view mode.
Okay, now I see all the people, but most of them are just in names or initials.
So the first question was by Maurice Lava, the last question was by me, and the middle question was by Uwe Teuber, and you will see him during the next lecture.
Okay. Okay, Yuri, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you a lot again for this excellent talk.
Thank you very
And
much.
then I would pass over to Mariana, I guess, for the break.
Okay, again, thank you very much for talk, and thank you everyone for questions and joining. We have 15 minutes break, so we wait you again in 15 minutes, and hope you join us with camera also, more people. And just a small reminder to wait till the end of the second session, because Oksana Dobush will make the conference photo, so please wait and join us later. And for sure, yes, please join the talk. And now, some rest and coffee or tea or break.
And who will have some urgent duties after the end of the conference, just send us your pictures, your photos, and we will glue them.
Yes. Thank you. See you.
Thank you again. Bye-bye, guys.